Awesome. Good afternoon. Has everybody had a good week? Yeah? We've had some amazing speakers this week. We've had Senators Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Rick Santorum. We've heard from other conservative movers and shakers like Dennis Prager, Governor George Allen, and Newt Gingrich. We've heard conservative principles, traditional values, and numerous domestic and foreign policies. And here at home, we hold these values and principles close to our heart, but sometimes it's easy to forget that the conservative battle for freedom carries overseas. Our next speaker joins us from the United Kingdom and demonstrates that the conservative movement is not limited by oceans. Rather, conservatism is a set of ideals that are held across our globe. This afternoon, it is my honor to introduce former leader of the UK Independence Party and member of European Parliament, Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you. Wow, thank you very much indeed. You must have had an amazing week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for that very warm introduction. It must have been one hell of a conference, is all I can say. Do you know, the one thing I've learned through 35 years of adulthood, most of it in business, some of it in politics, the one thing I've learned is that good conservative values have to be fought for and defended zealously at all times, because we face huge enemies with the establishment, with the media, and worst of all, the biggest enemy that we face, those of us that have fought for conservative values, and goodness me, I spent 25 years fighting for Brexit. But perhaps the biggest enemy of all that we face are those that are within our ranks, those that masquerade as conservatives but actually follow liberal agendas. Now, I say that in the light of the remarkable events of 2016. You know, we all lived through it. We were all a part of it. But actually, in 100 years' time, in 200 years' time, when history is being taught, 2016 will be seen to be the pivot year, the year that good, ordinary, decent people took back control of their lives from career politicians who'd taken us in the wrong direction. And Brexit, what can I say? Brexit. You know, we forced David Cameron's hand. We forced him into giving us a referendum. We had the entire global establishment against us. Even President Obama came. When I say President Obama, I expect to hear a few boos or something. Crikey, thought you'd all gone to sleep for a moment there. Even President Obama turned up in London to speak to our nation, America's greatest, most sincere and best ally in the world, and told us that if we voted for Brexit, we'd be cast aside and we would be at the back of the queue. What a disgusting act. Oh, you're warming up now. That's much better. But I have to say, in retrospect, the British people were so appalled that an American president could speak to them in this way that I reckon Obama was worth 2% for the Brexit side, so I shall thank him for all eternity. And I believe that what we did with Brexit is I believe that we paved the way for a similar political revolution to happen on this side of the pond. I genuinely, honestly, I do. I think the encouragement that the Trump campaign got, the encouragement that the activists on the ground got, is what we showed with Brexit, is that actually, when we do unite, when we have passion, when we have belief, we can beat the establishment. So whilst I shall never forget that night of June the 23rd, 2016, as those Brexit votes started to come in, and I was able to say the next morning on the Green in Westminster that forever after, June the 23rd will be our Independence Day. I like that. But I was equally thrilled on that evening of November the 8th through to the 9th, when the scores for Trump came through from across the United States of America. So I reckon 2016 with Brexit and with Trump was a pretty damn good year. I really do. And I've thought back on that year. I've asked myself, what was the best moment? What was the best bit of the whole year? Or at least the bits I can talk about in public. And I think it was the faces of the CNN presenters as it became clear that the 45th president of the USA was going to be one Donald J. Trump. So maybe a year on, or nearly a year on, it would be useful to remind ourselves of why those great victories happened and what the remarkable parallels were between the two. Firstly, what both campaigns had and what touched the heart and soul of British people and American people was no more apologies for who we are. No more apologies. You know, I'm old enough to remember the good old days when we had Margaret Thatcher as the British Prime Minister and the great Ronald Reagan as President of the United States of America. And what those two leaders showed is you can be immensely proud of your country, its heritage, its people, its place in the world, whilst at the same time cooperate internationally with like-minded people. Both of those leaders fought for and achieved remarkable conservative and free market reforms. Both of those leaders brought levels of unprecedented wealth to ordinary folk setting up their own businesses, doing their best from the ground level up. And yet once they'd gone, we saw 25 years of administrations in America and the United Kingdom, not to mention my friends in Brussels. Well, when I say my friends in Brussels, the truth is they absolutely hate me, and do you know something? The feeling's mutual, all right? But we had 25 years after Reagan and Thatcher of national leaders being ashamed to be patriotic, being ashamed to stand up for their countries. So remind ourselves that actually there is nothing wrong in belief in the nation state, in its flag, in its people, and in its destiny. And just as here, the campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again" in the United Kingdom, in the clutches of the EU, our slogan was "We want our country back." So let's remind ourselves that nation matters. And let's remind ourselves that the liberal left had been so successful over the course of the last few decades that anybody that dared to put their head over the parapet and even discuss immigration, to attempt to make immigration control a legitimate issue, was automatically written off as being white supremacist, racist, extremist, neo-Nazi, or possibly even worse. And yet what we did in Brexit is we put the message out that actually sensible, controlled immigration, people that come into your nation, that can speak your language, that want to adapt to your culture, that work hard, that don't bring with them a criminal record, that if you manage immigration on that basis, it can be a great benefit for both the host community and those that are coming. But that actually open door immigration, basically if it's low skilled and if it doesn't integrate, not only drives down the wages and living standards of ordinary hard-working British and American people, but in a modern world of international terrorism poses a direct threat to our safety and security as well. And what both campaigns did last year, much to the anger of the liberal media establishment and many of those in Parliament and Congress, is both of those campaigns took on that issue, discussed that issue, legitimised that issue, so much so that I was watching television 2 days ago. Stephen Miller, anyone see the Stephen Miller interview in the White House 2 days ago, and I heard echoes in what Stephen was saying in that press interview of all the things that we'd said and fought for over the years. So we must not allow those that wish to bury this subject and to take it away to ever get the upper hand. Believing in one's country, controlling our borders, they were key elements to the Brexit and the Trump victory. But there are more echoes, not echoes of things that I've said, but echoes of actually what Reagan and Thatcher stood for. You know, I believed in the 1980s, by the end of the 80s, that we were living in a period of free market capitalism. I wouldn't argue that it was absolutely perfect, but I would argue that it worked and it gave ordinary folk a chance to set up their businesses and ultimately compete with the medium and smaller, large companies. Folks, if anybody on the left on your campuses now tells you that capitalism is the problem in the West, they're wrong. We've surrendered free market capitalism. It doesn't exist anymore. We are now living in an age of global corporatism. We're living in an age where the big banks and the big businesses effectively own the political process. And what they do is to wrap every single industry in the most complex set of laws that the barriers to entry for small and medium-sized competitors become impossible. And that is why we're living in a world where the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And what Brexit was about, and what Trump was about, was taking on these big, massive, labyrinthine legal structures and giving ordinary people a decent break and a chance in life. And we must never, ever forget the importance of that. And we must go on fighting and campaigning for it. We really must. And we should also remind ourselves that another key element that both campaigns had in common was that we were both prepared to talk about security. We were both prepared to confront the scourge of Islamic terrorism. Now, I know that in the United States of America, things are not as bad, not as desperate as they become in some parts of Europe. But just look at the kickback that we've seen. Just look at the judges trying to stop Trump from putting in place some sensible travel restrictions. Just look at all of those things. But you know, they're still in denial, aren't they? CNN are still in denial. Hillary Clinton couldn't even bring herself to use the phrase Islamic terrorism during the election campaign. And can I tell you, another personal highlight for me in 2016 was being allowed to share a platform with Trump down in Mississippi. What a fun evening that was. I could scarcely believe it. I mean, nobody had told me I was going to be speaking to 18,000 people with Trump. I couldn't quite believe it. I was there, I was interested, and Stephen Miller came across to me and said, oh, Nigel, we'd like you to speak. I said, well, all right. And then Trump comes over and says, right, when I get to this bit of my speech, I'll introduce you, Nigel, and call you up on stage. I said, what, are you the warm-up act? So I could hardly believe it. It was an amazing experience, and I found myself the next morning sitting in the airport of Jackson, Mississippi, with rolling news on. And it was a live press conference from Hillary Clinton. Now, Hillary didn't do many press conferences during the election campaign. But to hear Hillary saying that it was appalling that the Trump campaign had now sunk to such depths that he'd even enlisted the support of a prominent Brexiteer, an extremist, a racist, a misogynist, a homophobe. And I sat there thinking, thank you, God. Because that is the other thing, folks, that you've got to take into account if you're prepared to stand up and fight for conservative values. You will be called a lot of very unpleasant and nasty names. You will endure through social media an awful lot of abuse. So be prepared for that, because I tell you something, those of us on the right of politics may have our faults, but those on the hard left of politics are plain, blooming, nasty people. They really are. They really are. And when people are being nasty about you, I think it's a very good thing for any man or woman in life to be judged by their enemies. And I think if Hillary Clinton is an enemy of mine, I'm in a pretty good place. All right? So these are the things that won us Brexit and won Trump the presidency. We were prepared to take on consensuses that had lasted for 25 years on nationhood, the ability to make our own laws, control our own borders, recognize the threats that face us in the modern world. And it was an amazing year, but just look at what's happened since. I've mentioned already the judges, but not just here, but across the pond as well. We've seen attempts by the judiciary to slow up or water down the effect of those elections. We've seen a media whose hostility, I think, to both Brexit and Trump is perhaps even more shrill today than it was in the initial aftermath shock of those elections last year. I mean, frankly, if I was to admit that I'd drunk a glass of Russian vodka at some point in the last few years, then maybe the story that I'm a person of interest to the FBI would actually have some legs. But these are the ridiculous conspiratorial levels that our media have got to. You see, our political establishment, our political class and liberal media, they simply still don't believe that Brexit and Trump happened, and therefore they're trying to find some reason. They're trying to find some excuse for why the whole thing happened. They don't understand that it was an upwelling and an uprising of ordinary people. But amidst all that abuse, I would really ask you to think this, that there is now on the world stage one man who is completely unafraid to stand up for his country and for his nation. One man who is unafraid to upset virtually everybody else in the establishment and to run his country in what some may consider to be an unconventional manner, by which I mean Twitter, of course. But that man believes in our common values. That man believes in strong defense. That man believes actually in standing up to the establishment and fighting for change. And I can tell you this, and I would never, ever reveal the content of any conversation I've ever had with your president, but I will say this. The last time I spent time with him, what really struck me was his absolute determination to carry out, as much as he possibly could, the programme upon which he was elected. And to do that, come hell or high water. Donald Trump has restored my faith in national democracy and in leaders who make promises to people that they try to keep. And I put it to you that Donald Trump actually is a true conservative hero. He really is, in many of the things that he's trying to do. And yet, who are the people really giving Trump a problem? Who are the people really trying to stop the agenda that won that election from succeeding? Well, it isn't the Democrats. It isn't CNN. It's John McCain and it's people in his own party. And I think as the midterm elections hove into view, it is incumbent upon all people who are conservatives to get behind this president, to help him fix this agenda. He's having a tough time, and we too, on the other side of the pond, are having a tough time. A number of chinless wonders in the Conservative cabinet. They're very good, the Tory party, at producing people like that. And a number of chinless wonders are doing all they can to water down Brexit. Folks, if you believe in true Conservative values, even when you think you've won, you haven't. You have to go on fighting. You have to go on fighting. And I'm actually very optimistic and not pessimistic. I do believe that 2016 was the year that changed absolutely everything. And I do believe the values that we fought for, the values that we succeeded on, are values that will continue to go on winning. Yes, sure, we'll lose some battles along the way. But provided we're united, provided we're organised, provided we're determined, I think what last year will show is that we're heading to a different world, a world where the democratic nation state has made a comeback, and not before time, in my opinion. Thank you. Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Now, I have left a lot of time for questions and debate, because generally that's the most fun bit. Now, we've got queues of questioners on both sides. Can we start on this side, please?
Yep. Hello, Nigel. My name's David Lawson. I'm from Northern Ireland.
I'd never have guessed.
Like you, last year I voted for Brexit because I believe that was the right choice to make. But I just want to ask you, following the Irish Prime Minister's comments recently about Ireland's refusal to help Britain work out a sensible border for Northern Ireland and the Republic, what do you think is the best solution for that border?
Well, can I just say that Ireland's Prime Minister, Ireland's new Prime Minister, is kind of falling into line with Monsieur Barnier, who's the European Union's chief negotiator, Mr. Juncker, who's the European Commission President, although after lunch he's not much good for anything, but there we are. And what they're doing is they're putting their political belief in this grand project ahead of sensible, sound economics. You know, Ireland should never have joined the euro. It's been a complete mistake. 2/3 of Irish overseas business is denominated in sterling or in US dollars. 40% of the Irish agricultural produce is sold into the UK market, and yet here's the Irish Prime Minister doing his best, effectively, to scupper the Brexit deal. I think it's very, very foolish, and whenever you meet Irish people who tell you, oh, of course, the Irish people love the European Union. No, they don't. They rejected the Nice Treaty in a referendum. They rejected the Lisbon Treaty in a referendum, and they were forced to vote again. The best way to keep that border as free as we possibly can is to have a non-tariff deal between the United Kingdom and the rest of the European Union. After all, they sell us about £75 billion worth of goods more every year than we do them. So if he was sincere about keeping an open border, then he'd opt for the tariff option. What they're doing is they are so scared that if the UK is seen to leave with a good deal, that other countries will want to do the same thing, and the whole structure will come crashing down. And it's incumbent upon the British government not to give in, frankly, to what I see as being their blackmail. You know, they're asking us for an exit bill. I mean, we own half the place already. I mean, they should be paying us. So look, I'm very unimpressed with the new Irish Prime Minister, and I think we're not far away now from seeing a big Eurosceptic movement developing in the country of Ireland. I think it'll come. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Nigel. I'm also from the UK.
Are there any Americans here today? Whereabouts are you from?
Northwest England.
Very good.
In your speech, you talked about the rise of corporatism. And basically my question, two-part question, is do you think that the rise of corporatism has led to hard left leaders who praise Venezuela, like Jeremy Corbyn, rising to power? And also, if God bless the earth and Jacob Rees-Mogg became Prime Minister of the UK, would you support him as Conservative Party leader?
Okay, the rise of corporatism. Yeah, I mean, one of the extraordinary things about this is that the trade union movement, which, you know, historically was there to defend the rights of workers so that workers could have decent conditions and decent pay, and yet the TUC in our country, which is the Trade Unions Congress, the body for all the trade unions, the TUC is in love with the European Union project, which actually has been the biggest supporter of corporatism that we've seen anywhere in the Western world. And you may think I'm cynical, but I genuinely believe that people's political opinions get changed by money. And the one thing, you know, Stalin used to kill his opponents, right? The European Union buys them off with cash. I mean, the last questioner asked me about Irish politics. Sinn Féin, who I'm not a great fan of, I have to say, but Sinn Féin believed in independence of Ireland from the rest of the UK, and of course independence of Ireland from the European Union. If you're a nationalist, you can't ever support being part of the European project, and yet they've changed their minds in the last 10 years. Why? Money. And I think with the trade union leaders, I suspect many of them have gone over to Brussels on Eurostar, rather enjoyed the food, rather enjoyed the wine, and thought, you know what, it's not so bad here after all, is it? So that is how corporatism has succeeded. And yeah, it's ironic that we're seeing leftism growing in the United Kingdom, but its analysis is wrong. It's blaming capitalism. I don't think free market capitalism exists. Now, as for Jacob Rees-Mogg, do you all know who Jacob Rees-Mogg is? Maybe not. You do, some do. I mean, Jacob is a wonderfully eccentric backbench member of Parliament. I regard him as a friend. I think he's a delight. And I had him on my radio show the other day, and I interviewed him, and I said, Jacob, your wife gave birth this week to your 6th child. I said, how are you getting on with the nappy changing? And he sort of hummed and hawed and said, well, actually, Nanny does that sort of thing. And I said, have you ever changed the nappy, Jacob, in your life? And he said, no. I said, you're not exactly a modern man, Jacob, are you? And he bit back by saying, no more than you, Nigel. So there you are. So there you are. He has got a bite too. I don't know what's going to happen. It would be unprecedented for somebody to come from the back benches to being Prime Minister. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I wouldn't rule it out happening at some point in the future. All I do know is that the United Kingdom has a Prime Minister whose job is to oversee the Brexit process, and yet who supported the other side in the war. And I don't think, actually, she's a credible leader of the United Kingdom, and I think for the sake of everybody, she needs to go. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Farage. My name is Zach Sobek. I'm from Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. And I wanted to thank you for making the long trip out. I also wanted to thank you for being one of the very few politicians on the right to criticize corporatism, the globalist big multinationals. And I would just like you to maybe expand upon why the economic populists, if you will, truly have the best interests of right-wing politics in mind and not the global multinationals.
Well, I mean, the truth is, of course, that the right of politics has been very split on this issue. You know, the one thing that the big global corporates do have is a very effective lobbying machine. You know, they're kind of out there the whole time meeting political figures and even aspiring political figures. So they are very good at what they do. And there are some on the right in politics who convince themselves that actually this is the way things are, and therefore this is the way things must be. But, the effect of the Goldman Sachses and many others, just had to mention Goldman, really. I mean, isn't it amazing, isn't it? I mean, the Italians, when Berlusconi was Prime Minister of Italy, and then he sort of raised doubts about Italy staying in the euro, there was a coup d'etat staged by Brussels, and he was replaced by an unelected Prime Minister who'd been a former director of Goldman Sachs. And exactly the same thing happened in Greece. So this unhealthy relationship that I talked about earlier between big banks, big business, and big politics, or even owning big politics, I think the evidence is there for all to see. Look, if you finish up with a system of legislation that just spews out rules and directives, and sure, they're all for health, they're all for safety, they're all for the environment, they're all for motherhood and apple pie. It all sounds wonderful, but actually what you do is you make it impossible for the small man and woman to establish themselves and to challenge the orthodoxy that exists within any industry. As a Thatcherite and a Reaganite, I believe in free market competition. I think it's competition that moves man on. And I think that there are too many who call themselves conservatives who, frankly, over the last few years, simply stopped thinking and simply stopped understanding. Now, the biggest business lobby in the United Kingdom is called the CBI, the Confederation of British Industry. And yet, in private sector jobs, they only represent 9% of employees in the United Kingdom. Businesses with fewer than 20 employees represent 60% of jobs in the private sector. And we're hearing too much from the big businesses. We have an agenda dominated too much by the big businesses. And I think that conservatism needs to refocus and re-understand that giving the small people the opportunity creates competitiveness, creates more income, and in terms of technological advance, is likely to push man forwards and not backwards. We need to think about this rather than just accepting the status quo. What's your view?
I would agree with a lot of that. I just wish the right could shed itself of the political donor class, the big multinationalists who are pursuing globalism and are not pursuing conservatism, and I just really appreciate people like you. They're rare, but you're willing to take the stand.
Yeah, well, I don't get invited to many corporate speeches, I can tell you.
Good to hear. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, Nigel. My name is Samir, and I go to Bunker Hill Community College. And I wanted to ask, in the grand scheme of things, it seems that UKIP was a single-issue party, with the main goal being getting Britain out of the European Union. Now that UKIP has accomplished that, and after the negotiations are finished and it's all over and Britain is out, would you say that you would like to see UKIP dissolve into the Conservative Party or continue to be there into the future?
Well, I mean, what we should say is this, that UKIP, in some ways, was the most successful political party ever established in the West. I mean, we set this party up. They all said we were bonkers. They all said we get absolutely nowhere. And we have completely turned around the political landscape by 180 degrees in the United Kingdom. Where does UKIP go from here? Where does UK politics go from here? That all depends on what Brexit deal we finish up with. You know, you may see some protests from the Remainers, or the Ramonas, as we call them, in the United Kingdom, and you might see Bob Geldof screaming and shouting on a microphone, you know, and a few protests in Parliament Square. But do not underestimate the potential anger of Middle England if, having gone out and in many cases voted for the first time in their lives, believing they'd achieved this huge victory, if that is frustrated, if that isn't delivered, then I think we will see the second seismic shock in British politics after Brexit, and it will come at some point in the early 2020s, and whether it comes with the name UKIP attached to it, or whether UKIP is part of a new sort of coalition that forms, saying Brexit means Brexit, I can't right now predict. But, you know, if, as your question suggests, it'll all be okay, end of March 2019, we'll have Brexit, there'll be no need for UKIP anymore, that, I'm afraid, is wrong. I think the great Brexit betrayal has already begun. I'm hearing British ministers speaking about fisheries, speaking about financial contributions, speaking about immigration, and frankly, doing so in a way that is backsliding, is gutless, and is weak. And I think we're going to get Brexit, but we may finish up in 2 years' time with Brexit in name only. And all I can tell you, having spent 25 years of my life fighting for the cause that everybody said was literally impossible, was bonkers, was balmy, could never happen, all I can say is that if Brexit is frustrated, then I would have absolutely no choice, personally, but to throw myself back into the frontline fight of British politics to make sure that we do really, really get it. All right? Thank you. Sir.
Hello, Mr. Farage. My name is Benjamin Schrader from Texas A&M University, and I have to say I'm one of your biggest fans in the world. For sure, you're amazing. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think will be the next country to leave the EU?
Ah, right. Yeah, this is really a gambling question, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Well, okay. It won't be Germany. Because after all, why would you want to leave something that you're now virtually totally in control of? And, I mean, it is amazing. When the euro crisis hit back in 2008, the people running the European Club, people like Mr. Barroso, the former Maoist and former Portuguese Prime Minister, who, as I pointed out to him repeatedly in my helpful interventions in the European Parliament, that he was unelected, and he never liked that. But the truth is that when the euro crisis hit, when the banking crisis hit, the world looked to the only European leader who frankly had any authority, and that was Mrs. Merkel, not the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. Now, I think in many ways, since that date, Mrs. Merkel has made one truly catastrophic error. And just to say, as many of you that want to come into the European Union, you're all welcome, we can cope, without having any ability or any means to security clear a single one of them, I think will go down as one of the great historical mistakes, and I think will lead over the next decades, to a great deal of misery in many parts of Europe. And what an irony that over the course of the last couple of days, the EU have changed the rules for getting security cleared in airports. So reputedly in Mallorca the other day, it was taking 3 hours to check on to an aeroplane because the EU say they're now getting tough with terrorism, but if you come on a rickety boat from North Africa, then there's no problem. I mean, you couldn't invent some of this stuff. It won't be Germany, and it won't be France either. What I think is important to explain to an American audience is this. You know, in 1870, the newly unified Germany under Bismarck marches, crosses the Rhine, and causes a war. That very same country, in 1914, breaches Belgian neutrality that leads, of course, inevitably to the First World War. And then in 1940, they come and do it all again. I mean, 3 times in the space of a 310 lifespan of an ordinary person, the Germans come across the Rhine with bad intent. So, the actual idea after 1945 that France and Germany should sit down together and break bread and start to become friends and start to trade with each other is something that no sane human being could ever think was a bad idea. The problem with the European project is that it thought that war had been caused by the existence of nation state. And therefore the objective was to abolish nation state, but never to tell the participating peoples that that was actually the plan. So friendship, trade, cooperation, you know, being good neighbors, all of that makes a great deal of sense. However, the argument that because we have the European Union, there's been no war, is an argument which, I mean, frankly, I think it's ludicrous. I mean, were the Germans going to come again? I mean, are they that bad a people? You know, I mean, you know, the answer is that Germany was smashed into total submission and absolute humiliation in 1945, and that country now and its leaders have an entirely different mindset. This is no longer a militaristic nation. It doesn't pose a military, might pose an economic, but it doesn't pose a military threat to anybody. But that argument still, I would say to you that in France and in Germany and perhaps in Belgium, not that I'm always very nice about Belgium, but there we are, that argument still has some resonance. However, if I had to pick the big country that I thought was the joker in the pack, it is Italy. Why? Why? The Italians, in the First World War, supported us. And then in the Second World War, they started off supporting the Germans, and then they split, and half fought with us, and half fought with the Germans. For Italy, there is no emotional, historical attachment to this idea of joining together because of war, because they're not, as a nation, emotionally tied to either side of this very long-running dispute that went on for 75 years, you know, across Rhineland, Europe. That's point number one. Point number two is that economically, the euro has been a disaster. There has been no growth in Italy, folks, for 20 years. No growth in Italy for 20 years. Youth unemployment in Italy is now touching 40%. This isn't working. So the economics aren't working. And thirdly, they are a Mediterranean people. And I think for them, arguments about being safe and sensible and secure have far less resonance than they would in the cooler northern climes of Scandinavia or Northern Europe. And I think if there's a shock coming, if there's a major shock coming from a big country, Italy is top of my list. Right now, folks, in the opinion polls in Italy, a man called Beppe Grillo, who is the best-known stand-up comedian in Italy, is currently in the lead in the opinion polls. It's quite tough to tell who the jokers are now, isn't it? There will be general elections in Italy will take place at the latest in February of next year, and I think you're going to see a very Eurosceptic parliament in Italy. I'm not saying they'll leave quickly, but I think inevitably Italy is moving towards leaving. The one country that should have left years ago is Greece. And I think for anybody that believes in democracy, I think the way that the little Greeks have been crushed, not just by the European Union, the IMF here in Washington have also played a shameful role, in my opinion. You know, if you vote for a government, it's not up to international authorities to say they can't put in place their manifesto. And you know, the Greek economy has now contracted by 28% since 2008. Even at the depths of the American Depression in the 1930s, the maximum fall of the economy from top to bottom was 16%. In Greece, it's fallen 28%. So I think, look out for the Mediterranean. I think there are major shocks to come. I mean, I will say this to you and to all of you. They all say in Europe now, oh, it's okay. It's all going to be fine. The populist wave of 2016 is over. Just look at France. Monsieur Macron has won in France, which proves that our European supranational project is back on track. What they don't look at is that in the first round of the French presidential elections, 47% of people voted for candidates who were basically secessionists, something that was unthought of. And look at the east of Europe. Look at Hungary. In fact, a very famous British commentator, political commentator called Andrew Marr, he said, if you look at the statements of the prime ministers of Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, he said they make Nigel Farage sound like a Foreign Office diplomat. and these are countries that have lived under communism, that have lived under Nazism, that have lived under totalitarian regimes. And when that wall came down, and what a great line of Ronnie's that was, tear down this wall. I mean, it really was, wasn't it? It really, really was. But, you know, they've had democracy since 1990, and they saw the European Union as being a wonderful opportunity of getting closer to the West, and indeed through NATO, of getting a bit closer to America as well. Big part of the thinking in countries like Poland. Don't underestimate that. And now you have the Hungarian Prime Minister saying, well, maybe this European Union is beginning to look and feel a bit like the old Soviet Union in terms of how it operates. So I think whether you look at the split, there is a cultural split from north to south caused by the euro. There is a cultural split from east to west in Europe caused by religion and attitudes to immigration and indeed Islam too. The European project is dying on its feet. It's only a question of how long it takes. And all I can say is, thank goodness we had the sense to get out before the train hits the buffers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we're done. All right.
going for Nigel Farage, everyone. Now, I'm going to ask that you please stay in your seats. I have some very important announcements. Mr. Farage will be joining us for dinner tonight, so calm down, okay? All right, so if I can have your attention, listen very carefully for the details about tonight. First of all, you can turn in your evaluations and your thank you note tomorrow when you are checking out from the dorms, or you can turn your thank you note in if you've already finished it to any of our staff members as you are leaving. But your evaluations, obviously, since we have not ended the program, you cannot have completed by now. So please hang tight on that. Your buses are already waiting at Thurston Hall, so as soon as you leave here, please head straight over to the bus, get on the bus, make sure you have your name tag. If you do not have your name tag, you will not be allowed on the bus. Once that bus is full, it is leaving. So you need to make sure you just go upstairs to your room, drop off any bags that you have, and then please get on the bus. Now listen for security.